Greetings, Kerbinauts. This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 10 of Project Odyssey. Yes, 10 whole episodes now. We're barely beginning, though. We have to make it all the way to Duna, and we have so many things to do before we can do that, including what we're launching right here. This is a new module for the space station. When I was up there, I realized there were a couple of problems with it, but I'll get into what those problems were soon. First, I want to tell you what's going on with this launch. So I've decided to try something out. It's a little experiment. Just before this, you had seen that I was looking out at the map, and I saw that the space station was coming close to going overhead. In fact, you can see that nav ball there. The marker on the left-hand side of the nav ball shows that my space station is going to be passing over soon. It's coming across the nav ball now. However, what I'm doing is, without looking out at the map anymore, I'm going to try to launch and rendezvous with my station. Let's see how this one goes. So, I'm not actually going to switch away. What I am going to do is I'm going to fast forward a little bit, because you don't want to watch the entire launch here from start to finish, but I'm not going to switch away from this view. I'm not going to clip away. I'm not going to fade it out or anything like that. This is an experiment. This is the first time I'm trying this, and so let's just see how it goes. Okay, so things are now sped up to 4 times normal speed for the rest of this launch until we get up there, but you'll get to see, whoa, ooh, little explosion on its way down. I think just part of the fairing there blew up because I was still going a little too fast. Anyway, we've lost that first stage there. We're now powering up that Centaur and heading out on that, still going at 4 times normal speed. In my MechJeb window over there, you can see where it says closest approach distance, and basically what I'm doing here is I'm just flying horizontal along the surface, over the surface of Kerbin. You can see I'm trying to get it down closer to the actual nav ball where the blue and the brown come together, because when you're flying along that line, that's when you're not actually fighting any gravity and not losing any delta V to the fact that you're up there. Right now I'm barely losing any delta V to gravity, though, because you can see that I'm really close to that line. The gravity is lower up here anyway. It's probably like 7 or 8 meters per second, and because I'm going so far sideways in here now, I'm definitely flipping down below that line and going along it. That means we're not really losing anything. So now take a look behind us. That little blip, my friends, is the space station. So sure enough, launched from the surface without doing any maneuver nodes, without doing any looking at the map. All I did was I watched my close approach distance, and as long as it was still going down, I kept my throttle up. And as soon as it wasn't going down anymore, I stopped. It was as simple as that. It was so much fun doing this particular one here. Well, you can see that we're getting close now. I'm actually still using that close... Oh! Okay, well, maybe that would be a case where you actually want to use a maneuver node, because I underestimated how fast it was approaching. And so even though we got up here okay, it went by so fast I had to flip around and face it, and then we'll go by too fast again. So yeah, well, okay, got to do a little work on perfecting the whole process of not actually looking where I'm going in my rendezvous here. But once I can get that down, this might be something I'm going to try a couple more times. It was kind of fun, just launching like that, straight from the ground, right to the station, no maneuver nodes, no map. Who needs any of that stuff? All right, while we make our final approach here, still at 4 times normal speed on the playback, let's go back and discuss those problems. So the problems that I noticed when I was up at the station was, it was one thing, it was running out of power. A second thing is it was running out of oxygen. That's what it was. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I have life support on here. I shouldn't be running out of oxygen and power. I planned out how much power I was going to need. What's going on with this? Well, I think I haven't really confirmed this yet, but the power answer is pretty simple. That one is that, here we are slowing back down to a slightly slower speed while I come in and make this final approach here. And also, as you can see in the good old Bob patented method of approaching way too close, way too fast, but nonetheless missing the station. All right, right. So I was saying about the power. I believe what happened was I have some settings in the TAC life support system where I was trying to increase the amount of power that it takes to provide life support to Kerbals on the station. And of course, I'm also using that little battery indicator. Like, look up in the top left of the screen. You see all of my buttons in the bottom row of what that button. There's the one where there are 2 green ones and 2 green ones and a red one. See in the middle there? The middle green one is a fuse box mod. And the fuse box mod lets you see when you're in the vehicle assembly building how much power you're going to consume. But I think maybe it's not taking into account how much I would be using for life support. In fact, I'm almost positive it's not taking into account life support. Now, that should be okay because I was also using a spreadsheet to figure this out. But maybe somehow I was looking at that and thinking about how much power was going to be used or didn't put some number in my spreadsheet. I'm not quite sure what. Nonetheless, whatever happened, I think the station is drawing more power than it should relative to what I thought. So I made this new module. This module has tanks on it that will be able to supply any dock ships with extra fuel. There's a whole bunch of fuel space in those big round balls there in the middle of that truss segment. And also we have the solar panel sticking out of it that will provide extra power to the station. In fact, I had to put out a couple of them here just for the docking because it turned out that my Centaur was starting to run out. Anyway, we're backing up right now in order to bring it in closer to the station's, let's see, here we got the starboard side. So anyway, I didn't actually do any math on this particular one. I've got 4 big solar panels on there. It's the biggest ones I've installed in this particular, ooh, watch it, that is really close. Okay, we're not going to hit anything still, but you know, I got to keep getting really close apparently because maybe that's how I make it exciting for myself. I don't know. Hopefully one of these days I don't actually ruin a space station because I don't think I would revert that. I would just try to deal with the adversity and say, well, you know, bad pilot. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, the power there. I got the 4 solar panels, and once they're activated, if that's still not enough, well, we still have the other side. We have the port side, and I can bring up additional solar panels, but I'm thinking this might be enough. We're getting really close to docking here, too. Got to get a little oriented first, rotate it sideways and shift it over. At least it's docking a whole lot easier than some of my other recent ones went, like the airlock. Oh, boy, that one. You remember that one. That one was not fun. Okay, anyway, let's get back to this. We got the 2 problems. One of them was the power and one of them was the oxygen. The oxygen problem turned out to be that I just hadn't turned on the water splitter. Like, oh, okay, well, we'll turn on the water splitter. I forgot. Turn that on. It'll be splitting water, creating oxygen and hydrogen. No problem. But it's all getting scrubbed, and that's generating methane. And the methane wasn't actually getting converted back out of methane by burning it and turning it back into water and hydrogen. And so I went and I checked the part, and what was going on with that was the original part was actually from the life support system itself, and I needed, in order to make it work for me where I was using it to burn off methane, I needed to put a new module on it. Module is a little bit of code that comes from the DLLs that you download from all these different mods and everything. And whenever they have DLLs that are part of it, they can add their own overriding modules. So there's this module for converting resources that's part of the life support system. And I was supposed to put this one on, and my code was written to put it on, but it turned out I had a bug in my code and it wasn't actually writing the file, flushing the file to disk after writing it. So that module wasn't really getting installed, and that meant that I wasn't actually getting the methane converted back into water and hydrogen. So I fixed that problem, but it was a little too late and the oxygen had already gotten really low. However, now that it's all working and it's turned on, the module's fixed, I didn't need to actually do anything to the station. I just fixed that module. However, for role-playing purposes, I am actually going to have one of my Kerbals inside go outside on an EVA under the guise that there's some sort of problem with the life support and he needs to go on an EVA in order to fix it. And so he'll go out there and he'll do a little bit of work, and then it'll be magically happy and working finally, even though technically it was just I needed to put the module into the part file. But we'll do that EVA soon. Right now, we're finishing up this docking, and bam, there it is. We're all hooked up, and even though it says electrical charge is running out, that is not true, because we will activate these solar panels and we will be live. I'm pretty sure that should be enough, like I said. So that takes care of that one problem. Well, two problems: the power and pretty soon the oxygen. Now that we're all docked up, some of the fuel was used up from those orbs there in that Truss segment. So we're going to transfer most of the fuel from the Centaur stage over to that Truss. And once we have just the little itty bitty tiny bit left in the Centaur stage, I will decouple it, and then we can have it go under its own power back toward the surface of Kerbin. And then we'll come back here and we'll check to see whether I was right about whether or not those solar panels are actually doing their job. So as you can see, this Centaur actually had an extra tank on the top of it. I put some extra monopropellant on there because I didn't want to mess around with reconfiguring my Centaur to actually contain more monopropellant by default. However, I think that's something I'm going to do. I'm going to reduce the amount of actual fuel in it and increase the amount of mono in it, because I have noticed that I have been needing more than I had originally anticipated. Now that one has been sent back home, but there was actually a third problem that I completely forgot to tell you about. We had the power, we had the electricity, but we also have these radiators. So the radiators were originally solar panels from the Cosmos pack, and solar panels normally have a module on them that makes them be solar panels, where they can track where the sun is and they point toward it and they absorb energy and turn it into electricity. But I don't want them to actually be solar panels in this case. So I had to remove that solar panel module to make them not track the sun and actually generate power. I had forgotten to do that, or maybe something again with the part file not being set up right. So what I did was I removed that, but that made the animation of them go back in as if they had never been deployed. So I had to go back and add another module to that part file for the radiators that was called the animate generic, and then set the thing that would normally make them deploy as solar panels as being the animation that's part of that generic animator. And then I had to, of course, go back out there like you had just seen a minute ago, where I clicked on them all and told them all to extend again. Now that's actually completely just for visual reasons. It doesn't have any bearing whatsoever on them acting as actual radiators, just because that's how that particular part works right now. You remember in the previous, when I was doing my ISS stuff in the Project Gateway, I found that sometimes the module that does let them animate also would have some bugs where it would change where they were relative to the station, and it threw off the mass of the whole station, and they would be like a kilometer away. And just, to not have to deal with any of that, what I did was I put them back to just being a generic animation, and yet they can still function as radiators cooling down the station. Okay, well, as you can see, there's another launch underway. We got this one started a minute or so ago, and this one is Jebediah. You can see there in the cockpit, all happy about how he's going up into space. He's heading over to the moon. That's why we have these extra boosters on the side here, because we're providing an extra thrust to make sure that we have plenty of delta V to get ourselves over to the moon and be able to maneuver. Why? Well, why don't we go down into the KSC here and see for ourselves why.
Base Commander's Log, Day 248. We're still low on fuel, but the scans have proven that this dimension has an abundance of cathane on at least this Kerbin and its moon, so we hope this will be the case on Duna as well. We did not have anything ready to send to Duna for its launch window this year. Come on in, Bob. But Joseph assures me that we'll be ready next year. Joseph also says that Hadfield's wormhole is going to open in a few days. Jeb is launching today to go and be ready for his arrival. Pause base commander's log. Okay, Bob, so what's the status report? Well, I don't know how to explain it. It's just something feels wrong. Can you be more specific? Well, I went to go talk to Valentina, for example, and I completely forgot that she's up on the station, and just something felt wrong about that. Okay, well, let me know if you actually notice anything that we can try to do something about. Yeah, I will.
That was this morning down on the base. Right now, we're in the future. We're a few hours ahead in the same day where Jebediah has just finished getting himself up at least into his low suborbital path, and he's powering up that Centaur engine to get himself going into an orbit here that will let him look for his launch window that will send him off toward the moon. It's a little bit further ahead of us, so we need to at least circularize first. But this launch we're watching right here, this is well past where I actually started off trying to get into orbit. So I've been playing around with Real Solar System, and they have these booster mods where the boosters try to act a little bit more like real boosters, real life boosters, where they sort of built into the way that the fuel is, they throttle back. I'll explain a little bit in a second here, but what I'm trying to do is launch with that mod installed, and I think I was having that same remote tech problem. This was essentially just a simulation. I was launching it with nobody on board. I was just trying to see what the boosters looked like. And what I figured was going on was, since it was an unmanned launch, that probably it was that same remote tech problem. So I came in here trying to mess around with how it was configured with different launch clamps and lifting it in different places and putting it back down and trying to make it work like I normally would had it been that same problem that I was having with remote tech that one other time. So I did a little of that playing, and then I came back in here yet again where I decided, well, let me just we'll do a simulation, but we'll put a Kerbal inside so that I can actually control it in case it is that remote tech problem. And as expected, going in with an actual pilot in the simulator here, it was working just fine. So we get launching, and I don't notice, but apparently I've messed up my staging when I put on that extra launch platform thing there, that gantry that would have allowed him, had this been a real launch, to go walk out there and get into the capsule from outside. And so in a second here, that staging mishap is going to definitely rear its ugly head. But currently, what I'm really doing is I'm paying attention not to that, I'm paying attention to the boosters and how they were performing on their way up, because I'm using that Real Solar System type of booster configuration. And then, boom. Apparently the staging was wrong. I tried to actually decouple those boosters, but what happened was it tried to decouple that stage instead. In fact, it didn't even really decouple. So at this point I'm like, well, this is not working. And so we eject. Even though it's a simulator, we're going to simulate the ejection. And Jebediah is now heading down while the rocket is heading up. And this will give me a minute or two to talk about how those boosters would actually be working. So I got the idea because I was messing around with the boosters that come from the component space shuttle mod. And they are configured with the space shuttle, the American space shuttle boosters, where what they do is they start out at a particular lower thrust to weight relative to their total mass. They kind of ramp up a little shortly after liftoff, and then they cut back during the point when the space shuttle would be going through max Q, and then they ramp back up again, but they don't make it go like this insane thrust to weight ratio, because as the fuel is draining out of them, of course, they're getting lighter, and that means that if the thrust were to stay the exact same thrust the entire time, then the booster would just start going into higher and higher and higher Gs, and they want to keep the Gs on the space shuttle lower. And I was thinking, that's a really cool idea. I'd like to put that mod into Project Odyssey. So I did, and that means now that I have to go back and modify all of my launchers to make sure that the boosters are working with them properly. And so that's what you see that I'm doing here. I'm testing out those new boosters. But it's not as simple as, oh, let me just install the mod and it'll work and everything will be magical. No. What you really need to do is go into the part file, or create a module manager file at the very least, that has the module that gets inserted onto the booster that will then work with the DLL that you've installed, that contains all of the information it needs to know based on how much fuel is remaining or how much time is remaining. You can go either way with it, but I've chosen to go with fuel. however much fuel is remaining in it, what should the thrust be on that thing? And you can scale it anywhere from 1% all the way up to 100% thrust. So I have to pick a thrust value and a whole range of numbers that then generate a curve. And what I've come up with is this. This is what the module looks like that you add. It's a module SRB thrust. You tell it the type of resource and whether it's using a timed curve or not, and then you have the actual thrust curve. The value on the left is the amount of fuel remaining, since I set use thrust or use time curve at the top is set to false. That means down here it's thrust. And so that left value will go from 0 to 1, representing how much fuel is left. And on the right side, it is the thrust value itself, anywhere from 1% all the way up to 1.00, which is 100% of the actual thrust that is its maximum capability. But figuring out what numbers I actually wanted to put into that chart was not simple. I had to figure out exactly what altitude the rocket was going to be at different points, because I did want to do that same lower thrust value when going through max Q. And I wanted to have it start out with a slightly lower thrust and ramp up just like the shuttle one would, and then cut back again, and then go back up again, but then still maintain that thrust to weight ratio that won't be shaking the whole thing apart like crazy as it launches, right? I'm also repeating these tests over and over again because I can't figure out through all these why it's not actually seeming to do anything. Later, I will discover that what's going on is, unless you actually stage the rocket, this internal function called onFixed update, where this mod actually does its work, doesn't get called, but the onUpdate function does, which means anything that has an onUpdate looks like it's sort of working, but if it also has an onFixed update, it won't work completely until you stage it. Once I figured that out, then things work a whole lot smoother in my testing. That also allowed me to get back in the simulator to see how things were going. So we may give it another launch to see how the boosters are performing. And what I'm doing is I'm keeping an eye on my velocity, my thrust to weight ratio, my actual acceleration value. In the bottom left there, how much I'm going through my fuel on the main engine, whether or not I need to have it throttled all the way to maximum, how well the boosters are draining their solid fuel. But this was obviously going a little bit too fast, and it started to burn up, and the main engines ran out of fuel before the boosters did, so I definitely needed to go back and make another tweak to those files. Looking here, I see that it was just surface lights that were exploding, but still, I don't want anything to explode while I'm launching. So we go back and we make another tweak to the file, and I do another launch, and this time I'm going to be watching the Q value in Ferrum Aerospace as well. Remember, that's in that window there on the left. You can see it partway down, and it says Q 5,000, 6,000, and we're watching to see when we're going through max Q, because by now I have set my thruster there, my booster, to throttle back as it's going through what I think is going to be max Q in its flight. So another thing I'm watching is I've pulled open that dialog there on the booster itself to take a look at that thrust percent. See in the middle, it's in the 40s right now, and it should be throttling back basically, because we are going to be losing so much mass. It's almost gone. And actually, one of the cool things about how this mod works is when you actually get it to the point where you want to decouple those, the thrust might be really, really low, but it won't necessarily be zero thrust. So with that little bit of kilonewton thrust coming out of the bottom there, as they decouple, if they have any kind of side thrusters that throw them off, they'll actually stay along the side of your rocket as well, which ends up looking really cool. And that's part of what makes the space shuttle launches look cool. So you can see that this actually didn't go too badly, but this was a simulation, and so we're going to need to do it again. But not before we get a chance to look at exactly what I was just talking about. So now we're going to separate those and look how they go away. They're not going too fast. They don't collide with anything. That thrust helps to throw them off and make them go clear of your actual launcher. I like this mod. I'm keeping this one. I got this from the CSS mod. It's actually part of the real solar system install, but I'm going to keep using it in Project Odyssey. But the testing didn't stop there. We have a few more launches to go before I see whether or not I like exactly how it's progressing through the atmosphere at every single point along the way. That's why I keep bringing up the Ferrum Aerospace's Q value to see whether or not it's throttling back at the right time and whether or not I'm going too fast, too low, or going a little too fast even when it's time to decouple them. In this one, I lowered the thrust even just a little bit more than it was in the last one because I wanted to make sure that I had used up most of that thrust for the actual launch and just had that little itty bit left over for it to decouple and still have some thrust to go off. And now because that same system is being applied to all of my boosters, just because of the way that my program writes out the files, it actually now is also applying to those retro boosters that pull the stages off. Now, I was trying to do one last simulation, but again, it was going a little too far down in the atmosphere, and there were some explosions. Things got a little bit too hot. But ultimately, we got it all together, and we move ahead now into the future where we are actually back to the present, really, where Jebediah is now ready to send his capsule over to the moon and be ready to rescue Hadfield. Now, one thing that you're going to need to keep in mind if you've been downloading any of my files that I put out in the Dropbox, and that's that as I change some of these things that have already happened, it's going to make the old launches no longer behave exactly the same way that they did. For example, when I launched my airlock, I did it with a solid rocket booster for its first stage, and now that solid rocket booster is different. So it's entirely possible that that launch won't behave exactly the same way that it did then. This happens to me a lot, actually, because of the way that I make these changes. Sometimes things, they are retroactively being modified, and that can mess them up just a little bit, and there's a little bit of cleanup that needs to be done for that. Back on Project Gateway, that was happening quite a bit, actually, because I kept needing to do those modifications that would optimize the program, and that was causing me to have issues with the parts that had already been launched, and I needed to do basically a little bit of optimizing and then a little bit of cleanup to deal with the fact that I had done the optimizing. Now, as you can see, it is satellite time in the VAB. We're building another one. This satellite's sole purpose is going to be to go and scan one of those strange asteroids that came through that massive anomaly surge, all those wormholes that appeared. So we're going to make this and we're going to launch it, and it's going to intercept an asteroid and begin scanning it to look at its surface and find out what it's composed of, see if there's anything dangerous going on with them, and whether we need to watch out for them, whether or not they could have any sort of impact on Kerbin and cause devastation, tidal waves, what have you. We'll be checking them for Kethane. We'll be checking them to see whether or not we can make use of them, maybe extract resources from them, maybe see whether or not they have anything to do with our ability to get back home. And now this thing is just about done, so we're going to take it out on the launch pad and get it started. Now, before we can do that, we have to wait for the mission control to go underneath the orbit of that asteroid that we're going to go intercept. However, while I was waiting for it to come under there, I got a nasty little message saying that my Hydra 2 was now intercepting the moon. So we have to switch over there and do a little retro burn to make sure that we're bringing ourselves down into an orbit around the moon, capture it, and then we can worry about when that wormhole is going to open up so that we can rescue Hadfield. But for now, this is going to do it. We're going to stop here and we'll take care of checking for the wormhole. We'll take care of launching toward that asteroid, and we'll do several other things, I'm sure, in the next episode of Project Odyssey. Until then, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.